All the children in the world who burdens and have to go through the baggage that people have to carry. Just try to get that the feeling of refugees, the numbness of our society, considering all the other communication people and their homes and I called them my concerns. Politicians, businessmen, workers. Thinking, why don't people ask questions and do things that they start talking about communication and numbness? You just express with very ethereal marks. The marks aren't even there, they're subconscious. They're completely subconscious because when the painting works, there's no thought process at all. And I think that this is how Concerned Citizen evolved. Because when I painted him, I painted the man knowing that he was the entrepreneur, the tourist, the visitor, the refugee, all the things that I had been painting came together in one painting for the first time with the burden of what everybody's carrying. It is not always easy to enter the space and just start working or thinking or being creative, because sometimes one gets here and one feels very, very cuck. And you look at the four walls and you think, do I have the energy today? This is an old register for verbande gekanselleer, register for bonds cancelled. I found it at the Milnerton Market and I've put all my life in there. I write all the time about the exhibitions and all the pain that goes with choosing what you want to say at an exhibition and what the exhibition is going to be about. This here, you see, that's why I'm in the studio. I'm not in my home. All the cupboards are only studio stuff. So all these are dated with all my journals and drawings and sketches. Dated from '79. My life has been like traveling up a river. Every now and then I would hear singing around the bend. And so around the bend I would go and become occupied with living. It says everything about the ups and downs in my work, how it progressed and didn't.
I have known Arlene her entire working life. From when she was a student at Wits, I first met her, and saw the unfolding of her career and her work. It was often in her studio. So I was always aware of Arlene just building and building this language of communication, this highly analogical, felt, handmade, bodily made expression that she was exploring. And at its core was always her interest in people, but not only in the people in her own narrow engagement of suburban life, but with people across the length and breadth of the city and across the length and breadth of the country. And then ultimately to an interest in what was happening internationally in Berlin and in other centers in the world, in which the project of being human and the project of representing the human condition was playing out in different societies, but in a parallel universe that helped to feed and to nurture Arlene.
This is where I can start to tell you. This aluminium blown up bag is how I keep my paints. I haven't yet opened this in these 2 months. Since my move, there were my paints. Now, these paints are the white. Without these I can't survive, I suppose. Without these, my life isn't alizarin crimson. This beautiful non-colour. A different alizarin crimson. Look how different the colour is. It's the same colour, alizarin crimson, but a different make. One's German, one's Holland. Look at the difference in intensity colour. A black, without that, without the black, I can't paint. When we were students at university, Cecily Sash forbade us to use black in our palette. She said it will spoil our work. Not for learning, just generally. They didn't use black. It was just a rule that they thought if you use black, your colours will be spoiled. Yeah. Black is my favourite colour. Ask Ella and Eva what Yaya's favourite colour is. Black. And ultramarine blue, which is the mid blue. It's not got too much red and not got too much purple. It's mid blue. It's just the perfect blue. You can make all blues from that colour. And a yellow. That's it. My yellow, my cadmium yellow, which you can see I never ever buy more than this. In fact, this is probably about 6 years.
No.
Yeah, I hardly ever use yellow. And here's another alizarin. See, I use that a lot. So it's black, white, blue. That's my palette. But what I can't paint without is this little tube. It's only a series 2. See, series 1 is the cheapest one, which doesn't have such intensity of natural colour. Series 2, it goes up to series 5. Series 5 is the purest, this rose madder. But the others are mixed with other things. But this series 2 yellow, Indian yellow, without this, I can't paint. I'll show you. See, it's Indian yellow, so it's not yellow. It's not like cadmium yellow. See the difference? It's an earth colour, and it's a transparent. All these are opaque, so you can't layer them with glazes. But this is transparent. And this one, when you mix it with the linseed oil and the turps, it just, can you see? You can glaze it and glaze it and glaze it. It's the most amazing colour. Look. See, as you thin it, it becomes like a transparent, like a skin. So when you put it onto another colour and onto another colour, it just glows. It becomes three-dimensional. It's the most beautiful colour.
I also started painting and making art. We were all sort of unfortunate enough to go to Wits University. I mean, I love Wits, and Wits is a great institution. But the fine art department in the 1970s at Wits was a very dry, formalist school where we used to have projects such as dissect. You have to get, what was it? A green pepper. You had to cut up a green pepper, and then you had to analyze this green pepper. And then occasionally you were allowed to paint bottles. And I think that generally they were determined to make sure that none of us ever made art again. And some people were courageous enough and crazy enough to keep going, and Arlene was one of those people.
Robert has not just been my teacher, but he's been my mentor, and he has critiqued my work and given me wonderful, wonderful insights into painting, education, and life itself. The interview was like this. Robert says, never, ever again in my life, he's now 86, I think, will I ever have an artist in my studio. He says on public radio. I had to give up 4 days of my life. He said, when Arlene was there in my studio on my easel, I didn't paint one mark.
Marla kept running backwards and forwards from her easel, and I had to stay still and just follow with my eyes. I mean, it's one of those movie scenes where the guy is frozen, but his eyes keep following. It was quite hectic, and it lasted for 4 days. It was quite a thing. I don't think I'd ever do it again with anybody, unless Lucian Freud, of course, but that would cost me £5 million.
What is your response as a sitter?
I think it's a good painting, and I'm very thrilled what you've done my legs. Now that sounds terribly sexy, but it isn't. She's done something with the blues down there, which is to me a very strong piece of painting.
So you merge into the art market and into the gallery system in the late 70s with the first exhibition at the Mark Theatre Gallery, which is like the gallery to have an exhibition in over the next decade. And at that time there's a really lively art criticism industry starting to form, supported by the newspapers. You've got Charlotte Bauer, you've got Ivor Powell, you've got Ricky Burnett, Ruth Jacobson even is writing at the time. And there are some quite strong engagements with your work. Let's just look at what Charlotte Bauer said, because it's a segue into what you were doing. She talks about the fact that you're looking after the girls, these 2 small daughters, and you've been teaching at the College of Education and your work at Junction Avenue. But she says, after all those things that you've had to do in the day, there is time that is spent making paintings. And she talks about you unleashing your paintings on the public of your second exhibition. I think that idea of unleashing is quite nice. And then this theme of people sitting around the tables, and we're seated around the table now. So it would be rather nice if you spoke a little about those paintings.
I started this exhibition of people around tables, and what my feelings was the alienation of the people around the tables rather than the conversation. And that's what fed me with the images that I was making. And in every different period of my life, because of also my bipolar, I have ups and downs, and I paint according to that, and that's why I know which painting comes where. And then I went to Israel. So I went with my family, my ex-husband and my 2 daughters, and I was on top of the world, going to live in a new country, really wanted to do this. And there are only 7 or 8 paintings that I did in Israel. My husband wanted to go and live there, and it was his dream to live there, and I couldn't do it, and I crashed. I had to come back to South Africa to recuperate. Never went back. We never went back.
So you've gone through this quite traumatic experience of going to Israel and having to return. You come back to Johannesburg and you launch a career as a professional artist.
Yes.
And you go through the Craig Gallery, and you go through the Kassira Gallery, and you end up at the high point at the Read Gallery.
Yes.
And you produce a body of work over a number of years that all gets bought. And
all got bought.
Is now in private collections.
Many in private collections all over the world, because people from other countries bought them as well. At that time I didn't think about the work as a body of work that expresses anything except my feelings of painting. I didn't think of anything in those days except painting the people I knew, painting interiors, and painting the people that I didn't know, like that.
I mean, we're part of a community that very consciously exhibits at the Market Theatre Gallery because it wants to align ourselves with this new non-racial space. And there are some galleries that have started to show black artists in increasing numbers and women artists. But somehow we all associated Everard Read in a negative kind of way. Why? What was going on?
I don't know if Mark would agree with me, but it was a very commercial gallery at that point. And people were exhibiting there who didn't have that consciousness of what was going on in the country. And I started to look out of the box into the world, into our country, and started to think that I don't belong to the Read anymore. And I went off on my own and met Wayne Barker and Kendall Gears and all that group. We found a place in Troy Street in the center of town, downtown Joburg. I used to park in N Street, I don't know why, and walking into town from N Street and the buzz and the beat and all of the rhythm that was going on. The one day, I had a little Olympus camera at the time, and one day, whilst I was walking, I saw this wall with a Zulu man scrawled on it in paint, in yellow paint, running. And as I clicked the camera, I didn't see this other man walk in front of it, and he was in a black suit with a hat and a briefcase, and he walked past, and when I developed the photographs, there he was. And he and the Zulu man were the beginning of my whole process of working in another vein and the man going forward.
This thing of that the artist crosses over the threshold of their studio and goes into the world, or allows the world to filter into them.
Yes.
And the world that was filtering into you was this extraordinary city of Johannesburg that was starting to come to life as an African city. Okay. And the Fig Gallery that you were a part of, the famous...
We called it the famous international gallery, the Fig Gallery. And we had exhibitions there that were wild. Downtown was really hardcore, and what we did was an incredible exhibition. We called it Breaking Down the Wall. It was in 1989 when the Berlin Wall came down. And because of the context of the wall coming down in Berlin, and the photographs which I have referenced, I still got the photographs from the Star newspaper in 1989 in Joburg. And those are the photographs that I used to paint a 6-meter panel of the Berlin Wall coming down. We did an amazing intervention, and that's in those days. Downtown, we had a nightclub, I think it was called The Junction, and it was a hardcore place where white people did not go. So we were going to go into this place and knock a hole in the wall. And the other side of the wall was whiteys who played pool. So we knocked a hole in the wall that people could walk through. And we had this amazing show where we invited our little suburban white people and we brought them into this nightclub, and they came into our place. So it was a very good intervention.
So talk about that experience of leaving the suburbs and leaving the Everard Read Gallery. We started to become aware of the fact that it was a gallery that never supported black artists when it was in the city. And the buyers were all the big corporates of Johannesburg. You were working with the second generation, with Mark Read, the son of Everard. So it was trying to rebrand itself as a new, fresh,
Yes.
contemporary gallery. But it was built in an existing house. And the galleries, a lot of the galleries looked like suburban homes. The artworks were put into suburban interiors in the way that the gallery was designed. So you choose to go into the gritty city and lose your market, or what happened?
I did. I absolutely did, Steve. And I was making some money for an artist. And suburbia for me had been so contained and so family orientated with my children, and suburbia with the high walls and all of that. I was so contained at that time in my little house in Sydenham, Johannesburg. So when I moved into the city, it blew my mind. It blew my mind. The images and things and that I took from the city as I walked through to the gallery. And I must mention another thing, that what I did when I got into the city, do you remember near the Carlton, or at the Carlton, on the pavements, these men would take photographs of people who sat for them, for their families, and then the next day, or when the films were developed, the people would come back and buy the photograph from the photographer. Well, I used to go and buy all the ones that the people didn't come back from. So, so those men and women influenced my paintings a lot when I was downtown. In our building in Troy Street, there was a bomb underneath. Somebody had placed a bomb. It didn't destroy the building, but there was a bomb. Okay. And Wayne used to work on the balcony, and he was making amazing face masks, black masks. And my first painting in this vein was of Solly, the owner of the building, Solly Cats, and a cat. And Wayne's faces representing the bomb. So it's a little intimate painting like this, and that got me moving into a political stance and thinking out of the box and out of where I had come from.
I mean, FIG stood for Famous International Gallery, and we called it that because it was a joke, like we weren't famous nor international nor really a gallery. But just to irk everyone, all the mainstream galleries, it was a space that was very experimental, and a lot of people did stuff that really couldn't be shown in other galleries, mainstream galleries. But then, as I said, the gallery started picking up on those kind of crazy, wacky art stuff. And when BACA and there was Günther Herbst. I mean, there was a lot of people that showed there. Kentridge shot his first movie there. The Tristan and Isolde was shot there. I think Robert Hodgins even played the main character, and that was shot in the Fig Gallery. Like weird shit with Ghana Fig Gallery, and it was a fun space. You know, it was experimental and easy and loose and crazy. And it was that pre-election, you know, where all of a sudden things started loosening up, and people were interested in other people's cultures, and you know, white people were like listening to like much more like Afro jazz, that sort of stuff, and it was a nice kind of interaction. And I mean, those days were still hectic. I mean, I had to have a dom pass basically, because I used to go into the townships to sometimes fetch the musicians, and you weren't allowed into the black areas as a white person, so you had to have it stamped in your passport. So like, even white people had to have a dom pass going the other way, you know. And we'd get stopped all the time, you know, like what's like a white guy doing at 2 o'clock in the morning in Soweto somewhere. So, yeah, it was weird times. Yeah, but then soon after that, when we had the election,
you're working with photographic reference material all the time, your own photographs, as well as historic photographs and photographs in magazines, including Eli Weinberg's material. But here in your scrapbook, there's the source material, there's the photograph taken by Benny Gould of some statuary of the Louis Botha, is it, in Cape Town?
Outside Parliament.
Outside Parliament, with the old South African flag in the background. And then that gets reworked into this extraordinary painting.
So the photograph you see is in black and white, and it was from a magazine. But I kept the South African flag in the painting because it's in there, but with reference to what it was and what it is, and the whole protest, which is really the beginning of my theme of protest and revolutions and things. And with the woman in the front, I think it was Sisulu's wife, and it was sold at FIG, which was really a win in those days.
One of the discussions in the history of contemporary South African art is about the the representation of the crowd of people, the column, the parade of people in the work of artists. These images of this mass of people marching on the march. You say that that's the first time that you deal with this subject matter?
Yes, it is, because up to then, up to FIG, I wasn't looking out of my personal space.
I wanted to talk about an extraordinary artist, South African artist from the north, from Limpopo, Jackson Hlungwane, who you met, and I'd like to hear about what you made of him, but you also acquired some of his work. And so just what do you remember about that journey? Because you went north.
Yes.
And he came to your studio.
Steve, I went to Venda with two friends, and we went to Venda before the Reed started buying those kind of works. And we met Jackson there. And then the Reed started a gallery in town near the Carlton Center called Sanderling Gallery, and they exhibited for the first time the sculptures that we had seen. And they exhibited these sculptures, in which was Champion Man, this huge man walking through space, which was his prized possession. It's been on show a few times, and I bought it. I bought it then for 2,500 rand.
What year are you talking?
I'm talking about the early 90s.
Okay.
And he's been my prized possession. He's been in all the houses that I've lived in, even my small apartment. And my children have grown up with Champion Man.
We grew up with so much stuff in the house. Yeah, always like masking tape on the door and like pictures all around, and my mom's whole entire interior world was on display for everyone to see on the wall, which was really hard for me growing up, because you want your parents' privacy to be private, and it wasn't. It was right there, taped up with masking tape and a million articles, and it just. But it also, like, as an adult, I realized like how much it informed me, because I would have had a very boring life if my mom hadn't been an artist.
I've taught you some very interesting things in your life, Noni, because I'm an interesting mom. I've had good, interesting friends for you and the girls and Tati, and a garden with a home with always paint and interesting things to talk about. I think so.
When I was 12, and we all lived in this huge house in Joburg with this incredible garden and this like tortoise that appeared out of nowhere and this like rabbit that appeared out of nowhere. And it was this magical garden. We all used to congregate under this beautiful plum tree in the garden with lilies surrounding the plum tree. That was so beautiful. And all my mom's friends would come there, all the artists, and that's where like all the vibes happened. We'd eat like avocado sandwiches and olives, and they would drink wine and whiskey and get stoned. And so I obviously have a visceral memory of this as a child. So much of her work is political and like, or it feels like that. And that was such a beautiful painting of that time. And it's very abstract, it's very black, and has a lot of like intense colors, and you wouldn't know that it's a tree, but I know, and it's reminded me of the time.
I bought 3 bags of compost. This should be enough. If you ever know, I am so excited, you have no idea. I think I'll start there again. Look at this, Sean. Look at this. It's rich soil, so that all of this can grow beautifully. If you ever know anything more beautiful, I can't understand why people don't do this themselves.
Wow, that looks amazing.
Isn't that amazing? Why should not people wish to do this rather than get a garden man and they have not the pleasure? This is absolutely the best day of my life. When I came to live here from Johannesburg, I moved to Long Street. My studio was above Mama Africa in Long Street. And my home, after living in Johannesburg in an 8-bedroomed home, was a 1.5 bedroom apartment on Long Street in an old Victorian building. And so I think I actually couldn't cope with such a space. So when I moved studio, I am now in Woodstock, in a very small contained space, where I live upstairs in a very small space. And downstairs is my studio in a very small space, and I have a garden. And so all that passion and energy and love, there was nothing there. It's now my garden.
Absolutely.
And it's all brought from friends. I've never bought a plant. I just pick a thing and talk to the garden. That's my sacred space, yeah. I think that's a very big point.
And you are now a grandmother, aren't you?
Of 3.
So what can you say to that generation, the young generation who are just starting with crayons and looking at your artwork thinking, will I ever get there?
First of all, they don't think that they've got much better things to do than being a painter, because it's a real hard journey to be a painter. It's a real long, tiring, courageous road. So I would say to them, which I always do, with art, not like with anything else, there are no mistakes, ever. And my Ella, my Eva, and my Lev, they know that already, and they embrace it.
Cape Town, a place for me. Cape Town, I love you so. Kimberley's very nice, you know. Durban is pretty, and so is Joburg.
Kevin Brand had organized this exhibition for District 6 called the Public Sculpture Project. For Heritage Day, he had decided to use their land as site-specific for the artists and invited 50 artists to represent themselves with an installation on the land. And I chose Hanover Street, which is the only bit of environment that still exists. We had 3 months to do the project, and it was the first piece of work I was doing for Cape Town. I went to Research District 6 and I thought the vinyl, you know, the vinyl floors, and it just gave me the impression of the people who lived in District 6 and their toilets and their bathrooms and their kitchens. I cut up 300 squares, 20 by 20 centimeters, researched the people who were removed from those areas, and I painted their portraits. And I lay down in the environment more than 7 or 8 meters, all the 299 portraits, and I covered them with the glass. It was shatterproof, double-sided glass. And in order to relate the actual visual of the work and to hold it together, I went to the post office and I got 299 telephone directories. The weather and the environment and the rain and the wind blew them up. And these, like whispering, whispering, whispering. It was just so beautiful. And the people on Heritage Day, the actual people from District 6, they arrived and they walked, but with such respect, they walked up and down my work and they cried. They said it was like a tomb for them. And now they're all over the world. So it was titled Relocation, Dislocation, and that's exactly what happened. It was a very beautiful piece. When I arrived in '96, I was very lonely. I was fucking lonely. I knew nobody here in Cape Town. And I went to the sea every day to Mully Point. And there I found pieces of vinyl that were worn by the sea, that the sea had drifted for maybe years. I didn't only go from 1996 that year, I went for 20 years after that and kept collecting these pieces. I've got hundreds of them. Every morning, or every second morning, I go to Mr. Parker, to Parker's on the corner here in Rudebroom Road, Woodstock, to buy a loaf of government bread, a litre of milk, and sometimes cigarettes. And why I love going to Mr. Parker is because it gives me the feeling of the community and the going, like in the old days when people used to order things from these little cafes. I used to do it in Joburg as well, and I always do that. That's how I painted the government breads with the embossed names on them, because we used to get bread in Joburg saying Joburg East, Joburg. And now I go to Mr. Parker. I do not do supermarkets because they overwhelm me and there are too many products to choose from. But Mr. Parker has everything that I need, and I buy everything from him. He's a wonderful man, and I go there and have wonderful conversations. Very important part of my day. And today, so I went to get my commodities, and there I find the Cape Argus today, when I'm going to start this work tomorrow. And it says District 6, Phase 3, reduced delay. And please God, it seems that the houses will be built. 108 residential apartments in the next phase of the redevelopment of District 6. It's a third of what was promised in 2014, but hopefully they'll do it. And my work will have significance. My palette, Simon Stone taught me this. I sat for him while he did a portrait of me. He wanted to do a portrait. And I watched him cleaning his brushes on the telephone directory and then just removing his page. And I couldn't believe that it doesn't go through. How does this ink, on a telephone directory when they print millions, it is the most stable ink. Look at this. Because normally if you do this on newspaper or something, your brush will be completely black. So he taught me this, and I've been using it for about 20 years since we swapped a painting each. It's the best palette in the whole world. So that's how I clean my brushes, and then I keep these exquisite, where are they here? I don't know where they are. I found it for next time, but it's the edges with all the pages. So all the pages are gone. But just the spine remains with all the paint from my months and years of painting. Beautiful. And it's part of the telephone directory of the District 6 dislocation, relocation, that I always keep the telephone directory phone books. At Amaler-Raviv Gallery, when I first came to Cape Town, I had the exhibition Departure, which was 21 panels of glass. And for some reason at that time, I must have picked up the Time magazine from 1983, where the George Siegel is sitting in front of the computer. "If Computer Moves In" was the title of the Time magazine, and I thought, the world is going to change, and it's going to be radical, and it's going to be fast. And it freaked me out. And I thought, I'll paint this glass panel, but I will break it with a hammer to show the fragility. But the computer for me it wasn't a good thing in my mind. It wasn't about communication and all the things that I've brought in afterwards. It was about the man sitting and being so focused into this machine. They spoke about the machine. It freaked me out. So I painted many paintings of this man absorbed into this machine. There is so much input from the media all the time that I stopped myself watching movies, I stopped myself watching TV, I stopped myself doing all of this. And even just being with people takes me to a place where I don't want to engage. I want to be focused on my work, and if possibly any painting of mine can make a little bit of a difference or a shift in somebody's mind, because my work is also representing the same theme of the struggle just for a home, for belonging, for people to just be.
I think that her interest in focusing on ordinary people's lives is a compassionate engagement with people who've been deeply affected by politics, whether they've had to flee another country to come to South Africa, whether they're living in Cuba and struggling to eke out a living. But she's always interested in the fate of the ordinary person, the refugee, the native, the person who's trying to find a way of making a life. So under apartheid, with the white gaze, the ordinary man building the city was erased, and through Arlene's work of the migrant worker, he stands boldly with dignity in the foreground.
It's become an icon, this image, and we have to print it. We have to first make sure it's on Hahnemüller canvas. If it's not on the Hahnemüller, we've had problems with its integrity, and then it starts to wear out and change colour. I've painted each one differently. Not any two are the same, I'll show you. Each one's original. One day, maybe they'll have a retrospective of 99, there is an edition of 99. Joburg men. So maybe one day there'll be a huge hall, my dream, with 99 Joburg men, and you'll see all the images exactly the same except the packages, except the bag.
Why is he an icon?
He's become, because he's the man that has toiled our soil, and he's the man who right now in 2007 has his place where there's no restrictions on colour, and he has the power to do whatever he wants to do in our land. I mean, if you look at the image of Commissioner Street 100 years ago, I bet if you had to look at them, if you had to fight, there wouldn't have been one black person there. They were all whiteys downtown. This is an amazing print, you know. It's an amazing print, I must tell Dale, because I've never seen these colours before. It's an amazing print. You see, it becomes like an oil painting, it's not just a photograph. I think that's why people like it so much. That's all I need. Oh, all I need is for good to eat in Joburg. I hate doing the Joburg men. It's so clean and neat and tidy. I have to first wash my hands in soap and water hot, and then I have to come here and make sure that I've got turps to clean my hands, because it's absolutely nerve-wracking to work on that beautiful print of Neil Williamson. It's nerve-wracking. And then I have to clean my hands and then wash it again a few times, like about 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 or 7. In Joburg, Dale and I had our Joburg Man panel, which is the man who built the city walking across an old image of Johannesburg 100 years ago. We had that put on a building at the Standard Bank.
No, it was a process of us talking and figuring out what we can work together, and we just started playing with images and concepts and things like that. That was, I think, in 98, 99.
Yeah.
And we aimed towards having the show at the AVA in 2000. So Joburg Man was part of a very big body of work that we did together. It was animation, it was just a very memorable show at the time.
The other thing about it being on the old Standard Bank building was it was in Commissioner Street. And Commissioner Street was the jewel in those days, Jameson. So Jameson, we heard all the music and we danced and we drank, and it was just amazing that this image of ours came back to Joburg, to that street. For me, that was the most amazing thing, because we went to look at Jameson's and it was just under the ground, just locked up and nobody there anymore, and above it was a butcher. And the space was just so interesting.
Joburg Bar opened up in Cape Town also around about that time. And Bruce Gordon came to our show and he bought the first Joburg Man, which he hung in Joburg Bar, and it stood there actually up until a few months ago.
Yeah.
With different versions, because it got so trashed, smoke and the drink flying around, that we actually had to replace it once or twice. But that just sold on auction now. But somebody actually wanted it because it's, you know, it was part of the history.
So the first page, I've introduced the book with my grandfather, who was a tailor, and in the background is this thing with all the men with all the suits coming to the tailor. And I think that probably influenced in my early childhood the man, and my man walking thereafter.
You then have three other photographs of early photographs. Are these the earliest photographs in the catalogue?
Yes, of my mother's, our home in Sydenham suburbia in Johannesburg, and me at my easel in nursery school, kindergarten, where I still have the report saying that Arlene loved to paint more than anything. And me and my nanny Minnie Rasabupia, and my sister and I.
One of the things I always remember about Arlene as a child was that she was always a very caring, warm child, very, very sensitive to others. And that's how she's always been, very, very caring and generous of her time and of her feelings.
And I remember that she made a painting, her very first painting, of a boy and girl. And subsequent to that, in the 40 and more than 40 years that she has been painting, she has not really been recognized as a great artist, a South African artist, and a female South African artist at that.
In the year 2003, there was a call for artists to come forward with ideas for adorning the three sides of the silos buildings. Before the Zeitz marker was created, Dale Udelman and myself were chosen to do the project. The one facing the Boerkaap was the central panel, and that was of Mama Africa, my interpretation of Mama Africa, with a huge Chinese bag on top of her head, painted in all the colors of that bag, in relation to a highway where she walked across the highway. So she was this monumental, huge figure above a highway. I titled it The Biggest Paintings in the World because they are rather large. And this was the highest building in Cape Town.
The aerial view of the New York Stock Exchange, to me, was the most important image that I gathered in 2002, because it was the time of the American collapse of the New York Stock Exchange. The world was going crazy for what was going on. And for me, our money is cattle. So I tried to paint cattle, which was a real difficult thing, as the trade, as the stock, as the exchange. What came out of it is these livestock paintings that were then chosen to go to Cuba, to Havana, to the Biennale. People walked through and could feel the banknotes, because the banknotes that I bought at the Milnerton market were all worn and used. That's the reason why I did it on cloth. And for me, it's a very important process because it links South Africa, Africa, and the broader world in such a way through money. The images that I've painted on each banknote are representative of the pain that I have felt about each country. The oil in Angola, the lack of fish in the sea in Mozambique, the Joburg man striding through the South African R1 note.
Okay?
Okay. So should I start? Okay, good. Why I want this interview with you is because at this point in my life, when I'm 56, I know that I'm going to change my work completely now, and I'm going to make work completely different. I know exactly in my head what I want to do. So all of this is going to be past. And this exhibition will be my feelings, because I've only been to Johannesburg four times since I lived there 15 years ago. This exhibition, which will be titled Native and Visitor, is my feelings towards being in Johannesburg. This one will be the starting point, and it will have one little individual man because it's about the strikes of the taxis, etc., etc., etc. This one is the suburbs in Johannesburg, it's not nearly done. It's the suburbs in Johannesburg because when I went to Joburg the last trip, I drove past William Kentridge's house in Houghton, where he had his house and his studio, and I went at night from the airport in a rented car through to the suburbs at 9 o'clock at night, and I felt absolutely bereft. There wasn't one single person, and all I saw was these little, like dog kennels. They're dog kennels, and in each dog kennel sits a man, probably from the Congo or Nigeria or I don't know where, one poor man without a gun sitting there, and I'm going to put one man's face in all of them, and that's for me the suburbs.
One that stands out for me was the butcher shop in Commissioner Street above the old Jamison's bar. As Arlene would do, she chose this sort of outrageous gallery, which was just, this was when Johannesburg was sort of, downtown was still hectic, but starting to make some degree of comeback. And the gallery was amazing, big open spaces. And as I walked into the gallery, I kind of recognized that the stairs next to the entrance were the stairs that went to Jamison's bar. It was a very poignant moment, and the art was sort of resonant, as it always has been, resonant and relevant.
I came here earlier today to have a look at the exhibition, and Arlene had written, because I hadn't spoken or seen Arlene for quite a few years, she'd kind of written a very brief history of the last 10 or 20 years. Arlene talked about coming back to the city and walking around the city and being excited and energized by the city and by the grittiness of the city.
About 6 years ago, I was in a very depressed limbo state, and I couldn't work. I just couldn't, my creativity wasn't there. And my daughter, Shani, my firstborn daughter, was in New York, and she wrote to me and she said, I know how you're feeling and I know how difficult it is for you to paint again. And she said, she scrawled on the floor in chalk on the street while she was walking. She wrote it to me with these words: why does the feeling of emptiness fill so much space? So I took this aluminium, this huge one, and I just painted, and I've done a whole series. They're all bought, and they are of people within themselves thinking and not contacting the outside world. I use the aluminium because the light of the aluminium talks to me more than the canvas. Just as a matter of interest, I used enamel house paint and oil paint to get that contrast of street and grit, and then the superbness and finest quality of the oil paint. So it derives from many different images. This comes from a book from Russia, a photographer who photographed people swimming for pleasure in a background with nuclear waste. This too is from a movie Tarkovsky, sad about solitude in Russia, and it's about communication and people and their homes and where do people belong. Then the Pope came into being the new Pope. And I ran out to get German magazines because our footage didn't cover it in magazines. I couldn't find any images. And there was one image that really was very important for me. From the back, him standing like this, praying to the crowd's praying to him. And I thought, this icon, this big, little, teeny, weeny man talks to so many people, and what is he teaching them? What is he teaching them? So I just began the crowds, and every time I had extra paint in the studio, I thought, all these people, and I just went on and on and on, and I created this mass against the individual and the mass.
This year, the Arab world erupted as a generation of young people, no longer prepared to suffer in silence, rose up against the hated despots who ruled their country. But the way these revolutions began caught the world off guard. The weapons of the activists of the so-called Arab Spring weren't guns and bombs, but the internet and the mobile phone. For the first time in history, world-changing events were recorded hour by hour by the man and woman on the street.
Dick Enthoven gave me his palace in East Berlin in 2011. I flew there for 3 months, minus 14 degrees, I had a bicycle and I knew nobody. And to keep myself from going into a major depression, I had to communicate with myself. It was horrible, and it was difficult, and it was insular and isolating. And the only contact I had with the outside world was my little computer where I tuned into Al Jazeera for the very first time. And at that moment in history, in 2011, in Tahrir Square, in Egypt, they were beginning the revolution. They were beginning their voice being heard. I listened to what was going on, and at that time we didn't know who were the mediators, who was which countries, etc. But I tried to follow it, and by following it, I realized that all my work is actually about the people talking. And I painted on one of those books for oil, all prepared, 50 paintings, and put them all around the house, and then thought, no, fuck this, I can't even look at this work, so I tore them into pieces. So when I had these little pieces of paper, which is what Twitter is made of, I put them on the floor like Matisse, like a Dadaist event, and I put them on the floor and began walking round and round and round and round them and thinking, what the fuck is going on in the world? And trying to find a thread to begin working for the 3 months that I was there. I painted a little red square. I said, this is Tahrir Square, this is where the people come to, this is where one person decides to meet another, one person phones another person, and I thought, well, this is Twitter, because the tweeting, the communication, there's no other way. And I think that this is like a seminal work for me, because it's brought me to the point of where I don't know where to go anymore. I really don't know what else to paint.
Her quest to grapple with the act of painting and the act of image making, which is a profoundly different way of transmitting information about one's lived world than other media. If you're a writer or a filmmaker or working creatively in the urban environment as a designer, there's something very, very different about the interpretation that is realized through the making of paintings, the use of oil paint and color and composition to arrive at this looking at the world. And Arlene develops a very particular language of how to talk back to all of us and enable us to see ourselves through this activity of making paintings.
This north, south, east, west panel tells my entire story of my life, from years of collecting iconic images. And at the very end of this journey, the European man from Berlin, which was the anniversary, the 50th anniversary of Berlin, and I was there, in the Martin Gropius building they had, that Berlin man became my European man for the Twitter painting and the Arab Revolution and everything after that. And I painted the African man through my journey as he walked, as he crossed over the street in Berlin, as he crossed past the European man and back into my world.
You use lots of writing. So
yeah, I always do.
For you, it's like giving out your ideas, or it's like a mark making.
It's both mark making. That's why I think I don't mind my signature on. But it's mark making. But look at those two there. That was solidarity with the in Havana, and this was in South Africa. So it's like the monument and all the burden and everything. So that's she sweeps and she weeps. So I use it so that I can push the viewer to think a bit more. Because if they just see that, it's different for me. Yeah. So I've been using words a lot. And I get a lot of my words from reading. Tolstoy is my very best. He keeps me going over and over again. And from music and that. So, yeah. And the radio and all, everything, the world.
The work is basically a blending of the exterior and the interior worlds constantly. Right. And in terms of my thesis around the work, around William Kentridge, Simon Stone, Arlene Amaler-Raviv, and also Deborah Bell, who roughly are part of the same period in history. What is interesting to me about the process, technically, they share something very striking in common in terms of how they actually paint. The major influence is, for me, German expressionism, not expressionism more generally. And expressionism is about the exteriorization of the world, of the inner world, and basically the materiality of psychology. So therefore you see how that particular medium or aesthetic tradition works so well, because it's the place where form meets the unconscious.
This is the most important part of my life. Without me working, I'm lost, and I'm feeling. I think it's very positive what I'm telling you. I'm so sad without my work. I'm lost. I don't know how people can just live this life every day, going to the shops or visiting people or having teas, because life is hard like that. I feel like I'm going mad. So, what I want to say is that without this, my life is very difficult.
What do we have then? We're having these arrested moments of a woman at various stages over 40 years of her painting career. But there's a consistency in one particular fundamental issue, is that there is no resolution to the fate of humankind. That people can't be blamed or shaped entirely by the histories they inherit, but they're certainly afflicted by those histories. Figuring ground is always somehow destabilized. Human bodies never quite inhabit the worlds that they are painted into. Everything somehow is opened up and released, and my key argument is released not into darkness, because the key thing is, though black is your favorite color, it's a color of liberation. And I think that is what people need to embrace when they examine your work retrospectively.